All right, everyone, let's get started. So the name of this panel is From Silent Films to Indie Comics, Ithaca's Contributions to Writing, Art, and Culture. To me, Ithaca is a bizarre contradiction. It's a rural town with aspirations to be a city. It has the same sense of community as a small town with all the excitement of a city. Yet that doesn't quite sum it up. Ithaca has a rich Native American history, it has scenic landscapes, it has a vibrant art scene, and is the home of both Ithaca College and Cornell University. But there seems to be some sort of transcendent reason that people come here. People differ in how they would describe it, but nearly everyone can agree that there's something special about Ithaca. But for our purposes, we're interested in the question of what compels writers and media makers to come to Ithaca, and what compels some creators of fiction to set their stories in Ithaca. From the silent filmmakers to the lone individuals like Rod Serling, and the contemporary fiction set in Ithaca, our eclectic set of panelists intend to figure out where Ithaca's mysterious power comes from. It's an open question, and there are no wrong answers. To start off, my name is Patrick Pinney, and I will be moderating this panel. I am a 2020 graduate of Ithaca College and have been working closely with Edward Cato to make ITHACON 45 a reality. Our panelists include Stephen Frug, the author of the photo comic Happenstance. He wrote, shot, and edited the comic. Oh, I'm sorry?
It's Frug, actually.
My mistake, Mr. Frug. Stephen Frug, the author of the photo comic Happenstance, is the author of the photo comic Happenstance. He wrote, shot, and edited the comic, capturing the guided improvisations of his actors in front of the beautiful backdrops of Ithaca. Happenstance discusses religion, love, and all the other things that make life interesting in a creative and inventive manner. Shelley Bond is an editor, publisher, and IC alum. She's been an editor at Vertigo Comics for over 20 years, and since then has launched IDW's Black Crown imprint. She's currently working hard on her upcoming Kickstarter-funded comic, Heavy Rotation, a comic that recollects the 80s college DJ experiences of students at Ithaca College. Leslie Daniels is an Ithaca-based novelist, essayist, and writing teacher. She authored the novel Cleaning Nabokov's House, which follows the central character Barb's life in a house where author Vladimir Nabokov once lived. Leslie too lives in one of the houses in Ithaca where Nabokov once lived. The novel is under option for film. Leslie is at work on a memoir of her artist sister, Valerie Daniels. Diana Riesman is executive director and co-founder of the Wharton Studio Museum, as well as a founding member and current board president of Friends of Stewart Park. With these two organizations and her long career in the movie business and at NPR, Diana is thrilled to be preserving and celebrating the role Ithaca and the region played in early American movie making. And lastly, Michael Watson is a writer, filmmaker, and author of the independent comic Ithaqa. Ithaqa is set in Prohibition-era Ithaca, with all the film, legging, and eldritch horrors that come with the decade of the 1920s. Michael brings us both a reflection of Ithaca's past, as well as a fresh new story created in the age of Kickstarter. All right, and with that, our introduction is done. From here, I would simply like to facilitate a conversation about what you think makes Ithaca important. And I open the floor to anyone who wants to make a suggestion.
I'll start. I was intrigued, Patrick, by your idea that the land means something. And I think, you know, as a descendant of colonialists, it's very obvious that the meaning of the land that had been in the hands of the people who lived here, the Native Americans, is oblique to me, or obscure, or not transmitted. You know, like a lot of people, I moved here, good schools, you know, affordable housing. That probably is a thing of the past, but you know, you could live in a nice place. You wouldn't have to. I moved from New York City. And the other thing I want to say about place and meaning is that for a writer, you're so avidly alive in your own head that there is a quality, I think, particularly for fiction writers, of not being rooted where they are. They're here.
I agree. If I can just add, when I think of Ithaca, the word that comes to mind immediately is Mythica. And as an Ithaca alum, I graduated in 1980, which is a long time ago, as you can deduce from my cough. It's always held a special place in my heart. And I just want to say that in the comic book that I edited and curated, Heavy Rotation, which was basically a love letter to 80s college radio, I got together with some former DJs of 92 WICB, which I'm told is still the station for innovation. And we got together and we wanted to remember that collective experience of being master control of the airwaves. So when I put the book together, I wanted it to be much more than just how do you broadcast your favorite music over the airwaves. I wanted to celebrate the magic of Ithaca. So if I had to say there was one object that was the absolute answer to your question from where I'm sitting, it's actually something that I captured in a comic book page. And it's a magnetic sphere, and it's the texture ball, which I'm sure many of you know has been called many different things, a head, a disc. And I actually go over its fundamentals and foundation in the comic book, but it was created by Jack Squire, and it's made of fiberglass and steel. And to me, it has magical components. And it's certainly my favorite place that I'll always remember in Ithaca for various reasons.
So I have to admit, for me, I think meaning and magic are human created. I don't experience the land itself as, you know, in special in that way. I do think, I mean, it's a very gorgeous area, and I was doing a comic that was based on photographs, which I, you know, then photoshopped. So I did everything I could to sort of incorporate the beauty of the place, both natural but also particularly artificial. You know, just the city. I think what makes Ithaca special is the community, that you've got a lot of quirky and interesting and artistic people, many brought by the colleges, some just brought by the fact that it's cheaper to live here. I think it's, you know, a good place to make art, because if you go to New York City, then you're spending your whole life trying to make a living instead of making art. But if you are in somewhere where it's a little bit saner, you can focus on the art. I guess for me, what I would say is, in my experience, everywhere is special when you know the place and when you're there. When I was starting out on this very long project I did, I thought about, so the comic writer Alan Moore, who I assume most people have at least heard of his work, has written a number of novels set in his hometown of Northampton. And I basically, you know, he kind of talked about how the whole history of the world can be seen through that. And I sort of thought, well, I think the whole history of the world can be seen through anywhere. And all sorts of things can be seen through anywhere. And so you should try to see what's, you know, worthwhile about where you live. And I lived here, so I worked here. If I lived somewhere else, I would have said it somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I really believe people have asked me when I was leaving the big city of Los Angeles and moving to Ithaca, what are you going to do there? Do people go outside in the winter? It's very hard to move somewhere, but I really do believe that wherever you alight, that if you kind of put some roots down and reach out, you make a home wherever you are. We just happen to be in a lovely place called Ithaca. But I guess what's interesting to me is that I came here kicking and screaming because I didn't know what Ithaca was. And I'm a completely urban creature. And it took me about a week to fall in love with Ithaca and to sort of acclimate. And I think what it offers, and still offers today, and offered to the filmmaking Whartons 100 years ago, was this lovely melding of the rustic and the urban. So there's sort of just enough of each of those. And that's definitely what attracted the Wharton brothers as filmmakers. They saw these beautiful, you know, the abounding natural beauty, the gorges. They were visual artists as filmmakers, and they thought, wow, these are perfect backdrops for our films. And then, you know, downtown was only a few minutes away. And if you talk to people now, I think that is a big part of what attracts people here 100 years later. It's that melding of the rustic and the urban.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember feeling when I came here for college in I graduated 2013, so I guess I came here in 2008 or 9, that it felt like I had all the things I cared about having in New York City in terms of good food and music and community and art, but also I wasn't forced to be in a city. I was, you know, kind of in a beautiful natural kind of setting. And I also remember it was kind of strange that when I was looking for colleges, I was dead set on I needed to be someplace warm and someplace near the coast. And then for some reason, I set foot on Ithaca campus, and there was just something that, I don't know, spoke to me. And it was like a really typically Ithaca gray, like foggy day. So it wasn't like it was like a particularly beautiful day even. But I just felt something about wanting to be here, wanting to spend time here. And my now wife, who I met at Ithaca in the scriptwriting class, also had the same kind of feeling when she came here. And so I can't necessarily explain that immediate way that I guess my subconscious glommed on to Ithaca or whatever it was. But I felt that I wanted to be here. And so, you know, I kind of really agree with what Dana was saying.
I think one of the things about Ithaca is, and people have touched on this in different ways, is it's really a place where you can make things happen artistically. I mean, you can, you know, spring rights festivals beginning next week. And when that first started, I was on the first panel. There was like 5 panelists and 4 people in the audience at Ithaca College. And now it's like this great thing that all the various colleges participate in, and all. So there's this feeling of, there's a culture of, not total, but there's a lot of openness. There's a lot of willingness to listen, to decide that art is important in different forms. And if you wanted to put on a show, you could put on a show, and people do it.
5 to 4 seems to be better than we have here so far. I just have to say, but
say that again, Stephen.
5 to 4, which is what you said you had at the beginning, is a little better than we've got yet, but hopefully that'll come.
I don't know whether they're on the other Zoom link having a party, but we'll see.
Well, I think thing to keep in mind is we are recording this session, so it can have a second life. Leslie, actually, something you brought up earlier that I think is worth touching upon is that, you know, we all are citing our personal experiences with Ithaca, but unfortunately, we are sort of lacking in sort of someone who can represent Ithaca's pre-colonial history and the original inhabitants of this land. And I think that is definitely worth noting, that I think we would be remiss not to mention the fact that, you know, we are on stolen land. But I also think that I can't speak for everyone, but I think none of us are in a position to fully represent or explore that avenue. But I do think it's important to bring it up.
One thing that's actually interesting, I've been studying kind of permaculture lately. I guess it's a tangent away from comics, but it's kind of I guess to simplify permaculture, it's basically a version of kind of landscaping and farming that thinks in complex systems as opposed to just, you know, corn in a row. It thinks about which plants help which plants, which help keep, you know, moisture in the soil. And one of the things that really surprises me when I'm reading a book called The Resilient Farm and Homestead by Ben Falk up in Vermont, and he repeatedly references the Seneca tribes and peoples in the book as kind of the gold standard of agriculture that thinks towards the future, kind of cultivating these nut forests that, you know, you plant a tree, a forest nut tree now, like say a chestnut, and it won't reach its peak nut performance for 300 years. And so the idea that you are planting these food forests that will sustain your great-great-grandchildren. So I just, I personally really want to learn more, is kind of, I guess, my point. And I apologize if I go on tangents. I'm in day 2 of my COVID shot, so my brain is like.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Michael. I guess kind of another thing I kind of wanted to explore is like, we kind of have like different opinions on how much significance there actually is in Ithaca. And I think, Stephen, you actually bring up a good point of skepticism that, you know, any place looks important if it's the place you live. And, you know, as you outlined, Alan Moore has made the specific region he's lived in kind of almost retroactively important because so many of his stories are set there. And that's kind of what I also wanted to ask about, because sometimes the significance of a place is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if someone is personally attached to it and writes about it, they retroactively make it an important place. And for the individuals here who have set their stories in Ithaca, which I believe, with the exception of Diana, since you're more of a historian when it comes to these things, and Leslie, if I'm recalling correctly, your novel isn't set in Ithaca, it's just very similar.
It's set in a similar.
Yeah, a fictionalized, a fictionalized. From what I understood, it was a fictionalized version of Ithaca where you could take some liberties here and there. So out of the people who are here, I wonder if what compelled you to set your stories in Ithaca specifically?
So for me, I suppose it's the least interesting answer, which is because I was doing a photo comic and I wanted to do photographs outside, I was here. I mean, it was this really literal, you know, I'm going to be walking around shooting. My approximate budget for the project is $0. I've, you know, convinced these actors to work with me, but you know, I'm here, so that's where I'm gonna do it. Which is why, again, I said literally that, you know, if I were somewhere else, I would have said it somewhere else. But I will just correct, you said that I said any place seems important if you live there. I guess I would say that any place is important if you live there. That any place where people, human beings, live becomes imbued with meaning and, you know, significance and all those things. And the purpose of art, or a purpose of art, something art can do, is to bring that out and to make it rich. But that I think that can be done wherever you are. And that there's something to be said, you know, and a lot of great artists have done this, right? Faulkner had his little county, I forget that.
Yakapatawpha.
Thank you. Which, you know, was roughly speaking where he lived, and he set, you know, all of his novels, or not all, but a lot of his novels in this one place. And that, you know, it's certainly sort of the modern thing to do. Joyce said all his work in Dublin is just to pick wherever you are and make that special.
That's a great answer. Leslie, do you know if you could, if you'd like to, could you explain sort of the premise of your novel and how it ties into your own personal experience?
Well, I want to jump off of what Stephen said and also respond to, you know, Diana, whom I met very shortly after I got here, fell in love with this place in a week, I believe you said, and it took me years. And and part of what happened for me was I came here kicking and screaming, but I wrote myself into a relationship with the place. It was the writing that made me notice things in a different way. And I really, you know, believe in art as a transformational force. I believe that, you know, creating something changes things. And certainly the way I started to integrate being in Ithaca, my experience of being in Ithaca, being a writer in Ithaca, because I came here really as a literary agent who had written. And Ithaca, in a lot of ways, gave me the space to stop working exclusively with other people's writing and do more of my own. And in that way, it was a very tender and powerful place to be, whether that's a physical place or an emotional place. It certainly happened in the writing for me, changing my relationship. And you asked me, like, what is the premise of my book? Woman moves from the city, loses custody of her kids, decides to open a house of prostitution that services the PTA women of the town, and the sex workers are the crew team of the local university, not Ithaca College. Not that they don't have an excellent crew team. She gets away with it, and yet people still ask me about this book if I drew from my own life. And I think, people, we make stuff up. We're fiction writers.
Right. The best thing about fiction is you can lie. Come on, people.
Yes.
Terry Pratchett said that. Terry Pratchett said that best.
Yeah.
I must say, if I can just interject, I would have never guessed that would have been your book. And that's the greatest compliment I can give you. That's talent. And I'm going to be the contrarian, I'm sorry to say, but I think there's magic in Ithaca. I did not set out to become a comic book editor, but I didn't set out to go to Ithaca College. I found out about it in a very backhanded, strange way. Fortunately, my father could afford the tuition, and I was scared to death not to make sure that I utilized every red cent that he put into my education. I come from a family business. My dad runs a dry cleaning empire, and thank God my sister is running it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be who I am today. I was lucky that my dad worked really hard to afford the education for me, and I took advantage of everything Ithaca had to offer. And I think that there is magic there. I think when you set foot in a location, as someone said earlier, you feel something. You feel at home. You feel whether you can blame it on art or science or a magical artifact, like I mentioned, the Texter ball, or even just like a piece of architecture. I look at this beautiful brutalist building that we call Dillingham Center, that I think is the Park School of Communications. For a communications student, I came from outside of Philadelphia. I'm also an urban girl. I spent 22 years living in Manhattan. I now have been in LA since 2014. I cannot escape. I cannot wait to leave here. I'm not a warm weather person, but I believe in magic, and I believe that there are things in Ithaca, and it's what made famous writers write about the town. I mean, if you think about, just in history, there are some places that are just full of magic. And I do sometimes think it's what you make of yourself when you're there, but it's how it makes you feel. And the gray skies, I still remember the gray skies in 1985. I remember all the albums that I listened to. Those are the things that I still think about when I make my comic books, when I write, when I implore other people to bring their ideas together to work with writers and artists to create. So I have to say, yes, it's your place. It's what you make of your place, but there is something about Ithaca, as they say, is gorgeous, and it's Mythica for many reasons.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like I said, I like Ithaca, if you wrote it on paper, was kind of like the exact opposite of the kind of college or place I wanted to go to. And yet I felt something immediately that kind of drew me here. And the people I met here, are still the greatest people that I know. And I later moved, down to New York City because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And so I felt like I had to go to New York City, if not LA. And I didn't want to be in a warm, I know it's a nice, 70-degree day every day there forever, but I really like the changing of seasons. And so New York City was kind of
me too.
Yeah.
I miss it terribly.
Mm-hmm.
I still wear turtlenecks, but I stay indoors in LA. I just
yeah, exactly. And you know, I maybe 5 or 6 years later, I've just moved back to Ithaca. It really felt like it kind of called me back, and so much so that, you know, I set my comic here, right, because I missed it so much, and I missed the memories here so much,
and that's one of the reasons why I pulled my DJ friends together, because not to take over the conversation, but you know, it's a collective experience, whether it's college. Of course, there's ennui associated with coming of age, but there was something about Ithaca. And like everyone during the pandemic, you know, it was rough. And I think that the few times that people reached out to me on a Zoom call, I thought, we've got to capture the magic. So about a dozen of my former DJ friends and I got together. A few of them didn't even remember me, which was a little bit humiliating, but it was cool. You know, like some of them were upperclassmen. A few of them I didn't know. We came together to just share that amazing memory that we had of being on the radio station and what it meant. You know, it was what a great, in addition to just, you know, the academia, whether you go to Cornell or Ithaca or any college, I mean, the classes, obviously, it's the extra stuff, you know, that people impart to you and with you. It's the internships. Working at the radio station was amazing, but you had to audition. You had to take the rookie DJ shift, which was 2 to 6, which honestly was my favorite. And, you know, I write a story called Seventh Dream of Heavy Rotation. I lived all the way across campus in the lower quad. And at that point in time, you know, it felt like it took 5 years to walk 5 miles to get to the station. There was no campus security. I'd have to get there at midnight. We all know the feeling of being in Ithaca in the dead of winter. It was 1986. So I wrote about my experience, not just being at the radio station, which to me, it was like MTV in space. I was like in my own silo. I mean, there was nothing like that experience, but getting there was a trip because everybody was coming back from downtown and they were drunk and there were people puking and there were people that were, you know, throwing things. I mean, to get there in one piece was one thing. But when you got there, the ability to pick out the music to soundtrack your life, you know, there was nothing like it. And I'm so excited about the comic because I think we really did capture the spirit of community, of collaborating. And it's not unlike when people serve in the Army together and remember working together in combat. When you have that experience with someone, whether it's for a week, whether it's for 4 years, or whether it's for 40 years, it's magic to me. And I do have to say
being
that
a DJ is like combat. Wait a minute. Just being a DJ in college is like being in the Army.
I'm sorry. Let me clarify what I meant. The experience of working with fellow DJs. You know, you're on the air. You have to learn a set of skills, and you're working together. You know, you have to hand off. WICB was a 24-hour radio station, so you had to hand off the shift. You know, I'm using that as an example of a collective experience. You know, you're with a group of people for a finite amount of time, doing similar things, but to be successful, you're still working together. You know, you still have the greater good at heart. So I didn't mean to disparage or make any crazy similarity, and I apologize. I was trying to look for another type of situation where people might be able to understand when you share an experience, it's valuable, you know, it means something and you carry it with you.
I think we get the illusion. I think we got you.
I think something you mentioned, Shelley, about collaboration, and as someone who works in the nonprofit world here in Ithaca, it is an amazing town for collaborations. So like I can't imagine doing what I do, running my little arts and culture nonprofit with big dreams without those collaborations. And again, I think Leslie said this, or given the size of Ithaca, you can really kind of do things that you can't do in other places. Of course, there are like so many. There's like, I think per capita, the most number of nonprofits in the world or something here in Ithaca. But it is an amazing place for collaborations. And that's, you know, for me, that's been one of the most fun parts of what I do, is like reaching out to just completely disparate arts, culture, all kinds of organizations, and trying to make those connections between what we do, preserving and celebrating this movie history. And then it makes me think of the Whartons, who came, created their motion picture studio in Stewart Park and completely embraced Ithaca. And the city embraced them back. So the Whartons came here, they hired Ithacans as their cinematographers, production designers, writers, directors, DPs, and, you know, hundreds of people would show up in what was then called Renwick Park, now it's Stewart Park, to watch movies being made. And, you know, there were hundreds of stories each week in the Ithaca Journal about the comings and goings of the actors and all this. And the community just sort of ate it up and wanted to be part of it and wanted to support it. And, you know, there were 7 beautiful movie theaters in downtown Ithaca at the time. And so there was this ability by the community to share in the experience of the movie making by going to the theaters and watching these films that had been shot locally. So one other thing too, because Shelley, you seem so connected still to IC, and ICB is an amazing radio station. I listen to it all the time. Is that a lot of my friends here, I've been here for 20 years, and I did meet Leslie. She was part of, I didn't meet her in that first 2 weeks when I fell in love with Ithaca, but she was one of the reasons, she's one of the reasons I love Ithaca as much as I do, that a lot of my friends here are students, you know, former students from IC or Cornell, who came to school here, loved it, went away, and then something drew them back. And they came here, not because they were professors, but they came back because of the place.
The ambiance.
Yes.
So I don't mean to be the Grinch here in this particular Whoville.
I remind you, Stephen, no wrong answers.
But I will say that one of the things I find hardest about living in Ithaca is that I make all these good friends who are here for graduate school or who teach, and then they get something else and move off. And I mean, I suppose you could, you know, look on the bright side and say, it's nice because, you know, you now have friends all over the country. And of course, in the age of COVID and Zoom, having a friend next door is not that different than having a friend across the country. So, you know, certainly lately. But in general, one of the things that I find hard is, you know, sort of the maintaining of a sort of friend network and a friend community, simply because people are always leaving, because
it is transient for sure.
And people come for 4 years or, you know, 7 or 8 years if they're in grad school, or, and I have a...
Isn't that life? Isn't that life though? Don't people come in and out of your life, and it's up to you to maintain those threads and those connections?
It can
not
be
to
life,
pick on you,
but...
not to pick on you, but I feel like I must.
I think that's particularly true here, though, in terms of for people coming in for a graduate program and then leaving, or, you know, getting a job elsewhere. But yes, absolutely, Shelley, I agree with you. It's on. I have a question for the group, and it's kind of a provocative one. Do you think it's a good place for young artists? I mean, we're not young artists. We're not. And maybe Michael still is, but barely. And, you know, I'm thinking about coming up in New York and how I had this sense of all the best of everything is here. And it was an extraordinarily heady experience. The theater you could see, the theater, but the art, you know, readings you go to, everybody would come through. And I worked in publishing, so I saw a lot of stuff. But there was so much input And there was so much excellence that there was a sense of, how do I even begin to make my own voice be heard? And I do feel like the kind of space around my head in Ithaca is conducive to writing, but I don't at all regret, the early years of the intensity of receiving so much good art elsewhere. Because I do have a sense here of like, everybody gets a prize. It's that kind of place. It's like, oh, aren't we nice? Isn't this wonderful? And I'm thinking, no, actually, that's actually mediocre. I try not to say it, but it's like, no, that's not that good. It's just not. So, there's that small townness. And I wonder how it is for young artists.
I guess.
I think it depends on the.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Well, yeah. Why don't we let why don't we let Michael go?
It's hard to say. Coming up through the Park School of Communication, from like ages 18 to like 21, was definitely one of the most, pivotal experiences in my life. Where.
Agreed.
Yeah, where I was, I say forced as if like I didn't want to collaborate, but I was constantly collaborating. And I met so many different people, and especially in the early classes, you really had to kind of run a gauntlet of films to produce, and so you really were kind of pushing yourself, to your limit. And then eventually, you kind of built this network of collaboration that to this day keeps kind of coming back to me. Where, like, for example, I hate social media, and I hate the PR side of things. And I hate trying to be like a publicist for myself. And one of my friends who was in the dorm over next to me in Clark Hall back in the day, at some point heard that I was writing a comic about Ithaca, and she moved to LA a long time ago and is a publicist for DC at times, and she just wanted to work for free, and I still keep trying to pay her to do.
I have to ask you. I think there's more magic happening here. First of all, I lived in Clark Hall and I lived in Bogart, which might have been your.
I love Bogart. Yeah.
Okay.
Friends in Bogart.
I worked for DC Comics, so I'm curious who the publicist is because I might know the person.
Oh, it's Kat Newer. I don't know if you know her.
I don't. I worked for DC for 22 years. I'm sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, it's always fun to kind of see the connections kind of happen in real time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just I
Foundation.
learned so many important tools for collaboration and for respecting each other, because New York City is, honestly, in modern times, to me anyway, New York City is a very toxic place, at least because of how advertising centric everything is, and it's a lot of divas, it's a lot of abuse of workers. And here in Ithaca, through my professors and through my other students, I felt really important tools for respecting others and for kind of actually collaborating and not being like, a diva director who's like, this is my beautiful, brilliant vision, I'm George Lucas or whatever, right? And people just keep coming out of the woodwork to help me, including Diana Riesman, for that matter, who, when I was researching the Wharton studio because I wanted to incorporate it into my comic, I emailed Diana about just a basic question of like the chronology of some of the films, because I noticed that maybe one of them might have still been happening in 1920, but I wasn't sure. And fast forward, Diana Riesman's like the biggest fan and ally in Ithaca, who she door knocked for me, while I was in Hoboken. She was in Ithaca asking Buffalo Street Books, "Do you want to sell this comic?" Going to the comic book store, "Do you want to do this? Do you want to do fun events with me?" And so, Ithaca has started to kind of take off, in large part because of the city of Ithaca itself and the support that the people here have given me, and also that my alumni network has brought in as well.
It's so true. If I can just follow up by saying, it's all about foundation. I think, as someone who's, grew up in a small town outside of a big city, Philadelphia, I wanted to go to New York City to go to college. My dad would not let me. And we agreed on Ithaca. It had a great reputation for being a terrific communication school. And I pretty much, like I said, was scared to death not to make sure I utilized every penny that he worked hard for to get me there. And I was that kid who was on, the TV station. I was a director, I was a producer, I was an editor. Every film class, you usually had to work with others, which it taught us how to work with others, how to collaborate. And that is fundamental. That's such an important life skill. But I didn't read comics when I was in college. I was too pretentious for that. I wanted to be a famous filmmaker. I wanted to move to London and be an auteur, and that kind of thing doesn't happen. But I learned about comics in my screenwriting class. One of my teachers showed us a copy of a comic book and said, this is how you understand storyboarding. I was fascinated. I had no idea comics were made in 1987. The only comics I knew were Archie comics, which I thought were for kids. I walked into a comic book store in the Commons, and it was the late 80s. It was the comic book boom for arty experimental comics. I was Dorothy and Oz. I walked in and I grabbed anything that caught my eye, and I fell in love with independent comics. I fell in love with the Hernandez brothers. And sure enough, when I graduated with a degree in film and video and audio production, I worked in radio for my first summer out of college. I hated it because I didn't like the music the station played. And so I got a job at an independent comic book company in September of 1988, and it took off from there. I applied every one of my skills that I learned at Ithaca College through every one of my classes, even my philosophy class, my art history classes. I took a lot of design classes. It enabled me to have a career in comics because it's storytelling on paper. And I will say that
Shelley,
I'm sorry?
If I could, I've just kind of become aware of the fact that Diana has not really talked much throughout this panel, and we're kind of running close to the end.
Please.
So if Diana, just to make sure that everyone got their chance to speak, is there anything you want to add, as you are, I kind of see you as the historian of the group, seeing how that is largely your profession. And I kind of wanted to hear what, we've been sort of talking about our personal experiences right now, and I'd love to hear about what is not our personal experiences, what is sort of like, what has already been laid down in the past. What do you think like kind of brought the, the Wharton studio and the other filmmakers to Ithaca?
Right. Well, I am not a historian. I have a BA in history. I studied history in college and languages, but I'm an armchair historian, and I, sort of delved into this one piece of Ithaca's history. I worked in the movie business in LA. I worked at NPR. I worked in my radio station in college. Interned in the summers at WNBC in New York. Ended up loving public radio. I think what's so interesting for me about the Whartons, and just thinking about everyone here, Leslie as a writer, and Stephen and Shelley and Michael doing his comics, is that there's so much overlap. And what I'm finding really interesting in terms of the Wharton studio history, which is a really unique piece of history. The Whartons were making movies at a time when filmmaking was an emerging art form and emerging industries, like the early 19-teens, is that now I'm finding that I can sort of take that history and do different things with it. And there are different ways that I can broaden people's awareness of this history. We work with the Cherry Arts. We did a headphone walking play in Stewart Park based on Beatrice Fairfax, on one of the serials that the Whartons produced. They were particularly known for their episodic serials. Anna Coogan, who's a local composer, songwriter, musician, created a rock operetta based on one of the Wharton serials. So, and I'm always reaching out, and Michael too. Michael wrote me and said, "Oh, I'm creating this comic book, Ithaca. It's set in sort of the beginning of the Roaring '20s, around the time of the Wharton." And I thought, "Oh, how cool! This is movie, this sort of movie history that I have. Here's a way for it to be incorporated in a completely different art form and maybe reach a completely disparate group of people." So that's been the most exciting piece. Again, that goes back to, collaborations. And I work a lot with students in the Park School who sometimes the documentary students do their docs about Wharton studio history. And so I'm just, I think Ithaca is a bit of this, a mecca of, and a lot of it has to do, of course, with IC and Cornell being here, there's no question. But, you know, there's just a lot going on in terms of creativity and the, you know, the arts and culture here. Sometimes there's like too much going on at the same time.
So
and
if I
do it
can
all. So that was a completely, yeah, sort of a non sequitur, not really answering your question, I don't think, Patrick, but you know, this is just like testament to everything we're saying about this town.
So
well,
if
I was more interested in I'll get to you, Stephen. I was more interested in hearing your piece and what you had to say about this. So it's as far as I'm concerned, you fulfilled that. Stephen, as you were.
So I just wanted to mention another kind of piece of art history, and Leslie may know more about this than I do, but as far as I'm concerned, by far the greatest artist ever to live in Ithaca and the greatest art to come out of Ithaca was Nabokov. He, of course, taught at Cornell for about 10 years, and two of his novels are set in, here, I have them here. We have Panine and Pale Fire. They're set in towns that aren't called Ithaca, but are recognizably Ithaca. But to continue my Grinch role here, I think the reason he set them in Ithaca is because this is where he got a job. If you look at his artistic output, in the 1930s, he lived in Berlin as part of the Russian emigre community, exiled from the Bolshevik Revolution. And his great Russian novel, The Gift, was set in the Russian emigre community in Berlin. And then in the 40s and early 50s, he was really involved in butterfly collecting. He was a lepidopterist also. And he would go out west and go from motel to motel collecting butterflies. And so where's Lolita set? Lolita's set out west, going from motel to motel, because that's where he was. And then he came here and he wrote two campus novels. They're both set at universities. And, you know, so he set them at Cornell. And then he went to Switzerland, and so he set it on Antiterra. You know, I think, you know, what made it magical was his vision and his prose, and his, you know, talent. It's not that it was, you know, some magical place that caused him to awaken. He wrote great works before and after, but when he was here, he utilized where he was.
Yeah, I think he wrote Panine in my house. I mean, I lived in one of the houses where the dates match up, and he wrote Lolita while he was still here. He was out west in the summers, but it was Lolita that gave him the ticket out of here.
But Lolita wasn't set here.
Badly wanted.
Pale Fire, which he wrote in Switzerland, was set in Ithaca. Whereas
Right.
Lolita, which he wrote in Ithaca, was set out west.
Yes.
And Panine.
Yes.
I think someone else.
I named my mythical town, borrowed from one of his mythical town names that wasn't Ithaca. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, many of you probably know that Jack Squire was a sculptor and an architect, and he taught at Cornell and was a graduate of Cornell. He's the person that I referenced who actually built this texture ball disc in the Summer of Love with an assistant. So I consider him actually quite a celebrity and a famous person who not only lived, but also, you know, taught in the city of Ithaca. I'm grateful for his contributions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love. We called it the fish. Actually, we thought it was a fish sculpture.
There are conspiracy theories about it, and that's, I think that has been passed through generations.
But I also kind of resonate with what Stephen was saying too, because I left Ithaca, and so I really wanted to set a story in Ithaca. And now that I left Hoboken, part of me wants to set a story in Hoboken.
I think to answer Leslie, my take on your question, you asked if it was a good town for young artists. I suspect it depends a lot on the art. That I think if you're in the theater world, you might want to be somewhere with more theater people and more access to that. I think if you're in somewhere that is a more small scale collaboration, so Michael, I mean, I don't know if you're doing the art and the writing or just one, but you know, if most comics are a fairly small scale collaboration, you know, a couple people. For me, it was, you know, I had 4 actors, and it's a great place for that. And I think it's also a good place for the solo artist, simply because you don't have the distractions of New York City. I mean, Joseph Epstein, the essayist, once said that New York is a really bad place for getting the chair up to the desk for the writing. I mean, you know, it's just hard to focus. And, you know, Ithaca can be a better place for getting the chair up to the desk. So if you're a writer or a collaborator in a sort of smaller medium, I think it's a great place. If you want to make big scale movies or go into, you know, opera or something like that, it's kind of hard to get to where you're going from here.
But there's also movements of artists. Like you think about, you know, all the artists who were living in the 50s in the Loft District in New York. I mean, there was a kind of a feeling of critical mass, of excitement and mutual support, and, you know, people going to sit in each other's studios and read each other's poems. And there's, you know, there's that, which you can't get in your office.
It depends. Some people are much more sort of private, you know, interior vision oriented, and some feed more off the communal stuff.
Yeah.
But I think you can create your own Warhol factory wherever you are.
No, you can't, because there's no Warhol.
I disagree. I'm sorry.
I mean, you can have a factory and you can invite your neighbors in, but there's not going to be that magnitude of artists who happens to live in what they called 10 square miles surrounded by reality. You know, it's tiny.
Well, the prompt for this panel was no wrong answers, and I'm glad to see that everyone's opinions are varied, or else this would be a pretty boring panel.
Well, I was just interested to learn, after I was contacted by Michael, and we talked for a while, and then we ended up doing a couple of Zoom events.
Diana, just going to interrupt real quick. Just a heads up, we're going to be ending in 8 minutes. Sorry about that, Diana, you continue.
No problem. So we had planned a couple of events with Michael, in-person events at Buffalo Street Books to launch the first or second installment of Ithaca, and then we were doing a how to make your own comic book workshop for kids, which ended up being, of course, like everything else, over Zoom. And so it's just, I was very interested to learn. I popped into that comic book store, which is run by a gentleman named Tim, and you know, just talked to some people. And I had no idea. I had never heard of ITHACON, and I had no idea that Ithaca had this. It's like the longest running. I think it's like the longest running comic book convention in the United States, maybe, or the biggest comic book club. And that there was this. There were a lot of comic book illustrators here in Ithaca. So I was really interested, you know, just sort of by that. I mean, you know, like I think it was Shelley said, I mean, I read Archie comics and Richie Rich as a kid. So I'm dating myself. And, you know, read The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and loved graphic novels and things. But I was unaware that Ithaca, that IC put on this event that was held there. And so I thought that was very interesting to see that this has been this sort of ongoing, that there's this enclave of comic book artists and writers here.
Good. I've been keeping track throughout this thing of like who, what everyone's like word count is. Stephen or Michael, your guys are a little short. Do you have anything else you want to say as the time starts to run out?
Use a lot of words.
I'll let Stephen go first if he has anything he wants to talk about.
Not really. I mean, I will say it's been a great place for me in some of the collaborative aspects that other people talked about, but I do think, you know, I think we make places special, and there's a good community here. So Ithaca has become very special, but communities can be built and nurtured.
Yeah, no, I completely resonate with that as well. And kind of like I mentioned before, people kind of keep coming out of the woodwork to help me along this journey, which is really exciting, including ITHACON, which, you know, I've been kind of like circling the orbit of ITHACON for like maybe 3 years. The first year that I kind of was aware of it, I maybe had one issue ready, but just I think I had it digitally ready, but not physically printed. And I really wanted to be at ITHACON with a physical comic. And then the next year comes around, and I've got my big Kickstarter campaign, and I'm really excited. And I've got 1 comic printed and 2 being kickstarted, and I have this grand vision of a book tour where, you know, I come up to ITHACON for a few days, I teach a class maybe in Portland, I do some events with Diana, and then COVID happens, and we kind of get put on the ice for an entire year.
I have, you know, boxes and boxes of these, and I was going to come, my first con selling them was going to be ITHACON, and I was going to come and, you know, try to get people interested in this, you know, comic about Ithaca, because I figured that was a good place for it, and then COVID.
Yeah, right. That's what this was supposed to be for my booth, but at least now technically it's being used at ITHACON, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. All right. This is a good time just to warn everyone. I'm gonna end this at a 2:59, and basically right on the dot. So in the 3 minutes or less than 3 minutes we have, any closing thoughts anyone else wants to provide?
If we lower
or
rents,
as what was that, Michael?
If we lower rents, we'll have more artists here. # community land trust. Let's do it.
I can totally get down with that. All right. If anyone has anything else they want to add, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, I love it that we're all in, I love it that we're in a group of makers. You know, everybody here is making stuff. And I know Diana best, and she's also probably the most modest here. But she made, in the time that I've known her, among other things, she's made a museum happen. And I think, you know, that's pretty awesome to come to a town from LA and make a museum happen, among other things.
Thanks.
What if we ended by having everyone, because I want to hear where your museum is and, you know, what your book is called. So maybe everyone can just
yeah, sure. Why don't we go by Stephen, you go first, and then we'll bang through these like in, give it 20 seconds. You got 20 seconds.
Okay. Graphic novel, you can buy it at my website or on Amazon, or they have copies at Autumn Leaves Books on the Commons.
Sounds good. I'll skip over Leslie because it looks like she's still getting prepared. Diana, why don't you go?
I don't have a book to show. So the museum is a work in progress. We have a permanent exhibit downtown in the Tompkins Center for History and Culture, which is not fully open due to the pandemic, but we are trying to transform the original movie studio in Stewart Park into a cafe, exhibit space, and park center. The building is one of only a handful of silent motion picture studios still standing in the country. And we are so lucky to have that here in Ithaca, and it deserves a better fate than what it currently is.
I agree. Shelley,
Heavy Rotation is a comic book that you can actually find on my website, offregister.press. It will be available in June. And thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Thank you so much for coming. Michael, you want to go next?
Yes, we got 3 issues of Ithaca comic out. You can get them at Buffalo Street Books, eventually more places. Also Comixology, if you like them digitally, and the website, which is ithacacomic.com. It's important to note, it's with a Q. There is no U. We spell it wrong because it's creepy that way. Ithaca with a Q.
Great for the clarification. Leslie, you're up.
I can't find a copy of my paperback, so it doesn't
Tell you what, hold on.
What?
Here's a copy right here.
Thank you. Here's the Italian edition. Okay. Cleaning Nabokov's house. You can get it at Buffalo Street Books. Thank you, Patrick, so much for doing this.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for coming. This was my pleasure. I'm literally going to have to click the end button, but thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.